Well, it's very good to see you, and thankful for your presence, and thankful too that we have several, as has been mentioned, that are back, that have been sick. Happy that you're able to be here, and glad we can again be together. We have a busy day, Lord willing, today. We have the assembly, of course, this afternoon, and then this evening we have our prayer meeting on third Sunday, if I've got the date right. And so it's a great time together. You know, the weeks get busy, and I know it's a tiring week for so many here, whether you're making a home or whether you're working out at a job site or whether you're traveling. It's not a restful life, but there is a rest in being together here. There is a rest in coming together and thinking about things eternal, and it's encouraging to me to sing together and pray together. It means a lot, and I sure appreciate your contribution to that. I want to show you a rock. The picture's not very good, and I'm sorry if you can't make it out. But this was found in the early 1960s over in Caesarea Maritima, Caesarea by the sea. And it's a foundation stone, it seems like, or perhaps a dedication stone would be a better term, of an old building from the first century. And it's written in Latin, inscribed in Latin, so we don't know Latin. But we can make out some of the words. Here at the top, Tiberium. So it's a dedication to Tiberius, and it seems to have been written by or dedicated by the governor. The term down here in these beat-up letters would be an indication of that. But the enlarged box here, the last 7 letters or so of these inscribed letters would spell out the word Pilatus. And the last part, first part of the name, first name is erased, but we have, I think, enough to make out the words here, Pontius Pilatus, Pontius Pilate. It's another example of the often repeated fact that secular history, archaeology, has confirmed that Bible characters are not just made up names or make-believe people, but they are written in stone. They are historic characters who lived at a particular time. And the Bible is a historic book that was written to people in a particular time with the purpose of speaking to all time. But this particular man is of great interest to us, Pontius Pilate. He's mentioned in every book of the Gospels, and he's a memorable guy. He's a fellow that you almost feel sorry for. And yet I think in the end he's a man who can teach us a great deal by his unapproved example. Pilate, we call him the man in the middle. The reason I do that is because, of course, we know his story. It's referred to by Peter in Acts chapter 3. When in Jerusalem, not long after Jesus had been crucified, he's there and he heals by the power of God the man who'd been born lame. And then in his sermon, he talks about how that the God of Jacob, or God of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, the God of our fathers, has glorified his son Jesus, whom ye delivered up and denied him in the presence of Pilate when he was determined to let him go. Pilate was a Roman governor ruling at that time over the area that included Judea. And Pilate was the man who, in all the Gospels, is identified as being the chief Roman official from whom the Jews needed permission to put Jesus to death. So, Pilate, with, on the one hand, a desire, it seems, to let him go, Jesus go. On the other hand, a great fear that his position, his life even, might be threatened if there was an uproar by the Jews over a decision that did not please them. And so this tug of war we see take place. Let's give a little sampling from the gospel accounts. Matthew 27 and verse 2. When they had bound him, they led him away and delivered him to Pontius Pilate, the governor. So he was the governor. This was the territory that Herod the Great, had received and ruled over for a long time. But after Herod died, there was some shifting around, and for a number of years, this was a position that was run by a military man, and Pilate seems to have been a fellow with a military background. And so he was the man they had to see about putting Jesus to death. In Luke's account, in Luke 23, in verse 1, the whole multitude of them arose and led him to Pilate, and they began to accuse him, saying, "We found this fellow perverting the nation and forbidding to give tribute to Caesar, saying that he himself is Christ a king." That's quite a charge to make, isn't it? I'm sure you've read that before and noticed that. They didn't mention anything about forbidding to give tribute to Caesar when they tried him in the Jewish court, did they? Seems like they're making things up as they go now. And of course, that's what they're doing. But he had been convicted in the Sanhedrin, and now he's brought to Pilate, and Pilate's not going to care necessarily what the Sanhedrin likes or doesn't like, and so they need a charge that will interest a Roman official. And they make Jesus out to be some kind of insurrectionist. You know that Judea was under the control of the Roman Empire. Roman governors ruled over the land that at one time had been the free land of the Jews. And so these Jews were under the heel of the Roman governors, and they hated that. But they have to pretend here as if they are the great friend of Rome, greatly concerned that perhaps there would be an uprising and Rome wouldn't win. And this Jesus, he's a threat to Rome, a dangerous man, a man who forbids tribute to Caesar. By the way, you don't have to answer out, but you know that's a lie, right? You know that Jesus was specifically asked about that, and his answer is so famous that people who aren't even Christians marvel at it. Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. What an extraordinary wisdom. So, anyway, it was a lie. They had their own agenda. They just wanted him dead. They hated him. And so they bring these ridiculous charges before Pilate, that he's a threat to Caesar. He makes himself out to be a political king. He's a threat to Rome. In Mark's account, in Mark 15 and verse 1, straightway in the morning, the chief priest held a consultation with the elders and scribes and the whole council, and bound Jesus and carried him away to be delivered to Pilate. And now for the first time we find Pilate's words. He is quoted here in Scripture. Pilate asked him, "Art thou the king of the Jews?" And he answering said unto them, "Thou sayest it," which I take to mean, yeah, you said it. The chief priest accused him of many things, but he answered nothing. While they're just yapping all of these crazy charges, he's quiet. And Pilate marvels. Pilate asked him again, "Answerest thou nothing? Behold, how many things they witness against thee, yet Jesus answered nothing," so that Pilate marveled. It would have been so easy for him to answer. Pilate could see in a moment what this was. A lot of things he was, but he wasn't so foolish as to be fooled by these these Jewish officials who brought Jesus, as if they were honest men or sincere men. He knew this was a railroad job. And he marveled that Jesus would not answer them as he so easily could have. "Answerest thou nothing? Are you the king of the Jews?" This is how we begin. In John's account, John 18, verse 28, "Then led they Jesus from Caiaphas unto the hall of judgment." This is the place where Pilate is to be found, the hall of judgment. They go from the Sanhedrin and the house of Caiaphas, the former high priest, to now the Roman official. And it was early. I think that's also significant. It was quite early, wasn't it? all this kangaroo court that the Jews had was in the middle of the night. That doesn't sound like justice, does it? You can't arrest a man in the middle of the night, have the fellow who arrested him be his judge, get him tried and convicted, and take him off, and it's not even daylight. When it was daylight, that's when the rooster crowed, you remember, and Peter had his moment of reckoning. But now, early, very early, they're here with Pilate at the judgment hall, but not in the judgment hall, at the judgment hall. And the reason is because it would be defiling for a Jew to enter into this judgment hall. He says here, they themselves went not into the judgment hall, lest they should be defiled, that they might eat the Passover. It's just extraordinary how concerned they are about this ceremonial defilement while they're committing as wicked an act as ever been. They're in the process of putting to death the perfect Son of God. So Pilate goes out to them. You'll notice that here, verse 29. Pilate went out to them and said, what accusation bring ye against this man? And their answer, as they snarl and snap back, is, well, if he wasn't a malefactor, we wouldn't have brought him to you. What's the charge? Well, he's guilty. That's his charge. He's just guilty. Then said Pilate, take ye him and judge him according to your law. You want to get this man convicted, you convict him. They said, we can't put anybody to death. So Pilate, in verse 33, entered into the judgment hall again, having come out to meet the Jews because they considered him too defiling to be with inside his house. He now comes back into the house and he brings Jesus with him. And he has this sort of private moment with Jesus. And Pilate's quoted as asking the question, art thou the King of the Jews? Jesus answered him, sayest thou this thing of thyself, or did others tell it thee of me? That's a perceptive question. Did you come up with this yourself, or somebody just tell you about this? Well, Pilate, of course, feels like he's being maneuvered here. He says, am I a Jew? Your own nation and the chief priest have delivered thee unto me. What have you done? Jesus answered, and he answered the question that he was first charged with. He said, my kingdom, king, yes, but my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, then would my servants fight that I should not be delivered to the Jews. But now is my kingdom not from hence. Pilate therefore said to him, oh, thou art a king then. Jesus answered and said, you've said it, I'm a king. To this end I was born, and for this cause came I into the world, that I should bear witness unto the truth. And everyone that is of the truth hears my voice. And Pilate, crusty old, soldier, had seen everything. Jaded man. He just must have shrugged at truth. What is truth? And then he went out and he said to the Jews, I find no fault in him. Now, that's interesting, isn't it? You remember, you've read this many times, that he repeatedly made that point publicly. I find no fault in him. It's in Luke's account that we see that so clearly. In Luke 23 and verse 3, Pilate asked him, art thou the king of the Jews? He answered, you've said it. Then said Pilate to the chief priest and to the people, I find no fault in this man. Well, a few verses later, after Jesus had been sent to Herod and come back, he said to them, ye have brought this man unto me as one that perverts the people. But behold, I, having examined him before you, have found no fault in this man touching those things whereof you accuse him. No, nor yet Herod. For I sent you to him, and lo, nothing worthy of death is done unto him. And then finally, in verse 20, beginning, Pilate of chapter 23, Pilate, therefore, willing to release Jesus, said to them, I'll release him. He said, oh, crucify him, crucify him. He said the third time, why? What evil has he done? I have found no cause of death in him. Isn't it interesting that over and again, Pilate has said in this process, this man is not guilty. He is not guilty. There's another thing that I've never been able to figure out exactly what to do with. Maybe you're like me. Matthew is the only one who mentions this. While all the rest of this is going on, Pilate gets a message from his wife. This is in Matthew 27, verse 19. When he sat down on the judgment seat, his wife sent unto him, saying, have nothing to do with this just man, for I have suffered many things this day in a dream because of him. You know, there are all kinds of legends and stories about Pilate's wife you can read in non-inspired writings and legends. And there are those who say that she was a Jewess or that she became a Christian, all kinds of stories. I don't know about any of that. I've struggled to even figure out exactly the logistics of this. You know, where this message came from. Was it from God or was it just a coincidence? But I can imagine Pilate waking up early in the morning to deal with this problem. His wife may still have been in bed. And she may have, during that period of sleep that very morning, had some very unpleasant dreams. And when she had perhaps heard some of the things that were going on, and coupling that with the dream that she had, she sent a message saying, have nothing to do with this just man. She heard enough to know what Pilate knew, that this was not justice, this idea of trying to kill Jesus. And so his wife's message to him would have pulled him in a better direction. Something else that he pulled out to use as a weapon was the custom that was in place then to release a prisoner every year at the time of the Passover, a time of celebration, a time of deliverance. And so a prisoner would be released and his life would be granted to him. And they had a prisoner at that time named Barabbas. A lot of stories about Barabbas too that we don't know are true. But what we do know from Scripture is true. He had made an insurrection. He had committed murder in the insurrection. He was if you want to know what a real enemy of Rome looked like, here's a guy. He had committed murder in insurrection. He had blood on his hands, a real enemy of Rome. And so Pilate must have chosen him particularly with the idea in mind, since you're so concerned about Rome and protecting the emperor, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll give you a choice. What about we release Jesus or Barabbas? And they said, we'll take Barabbas. Well, I release to you then the King of the Jews, verse 9. He knew that for envy they had delivered him. You'll notice that. He wasn't fooled a bit by their motive. But the chief priest moved the people that he should rather release Barabbas unto them. And Pilate answered and said to them, what will you then that I do to him that is called King of the Jews? And they cried out, crucify him. Then Pilate said, why? What evil has he done? They cried out exceeding the more, crucify him. And so Pilate, willing to content the people, released Barabbas unto them and delivered Jesus when he had scourged him to be crucified. You know, if you turn over to John 19, there's an interesting part of this story. You know, this idea of scourging. Verse 1 of John 19 begins, his account begins, then Pilate therefore took Jesus and scourged him. The word there for scourge is in the original word is language rather is a word that suggests the idea of to gnaw or to chew, like chewing food. It's connected with our word masticate, and I think it's a very graphic picture here of what would happen when a man would be scourged. A whip would be applied to his back with an expert kind of evil ability to draw the most damage. and leave a man's back just chewed up as flesh might be being cut with those leather thongs. And so it was a horrible punishment in and of itself, and there were men who died under the lash. But Pilate sent Jesus for this treatment. I don't think he sent them to be cruel. I think he sent him there with the plan in mind that, well, maybe I can yet draw enough sympathy for him among the crowd when they see him after this punishment that I won't have to give the order to kill him. Pilate took Jesus and scourged him. Verse 2 reads, "And the soldiers platted a crown of thorns and put it on his head, and they put a purple robe on him, and they said, 'Hail, King of the Jews,' and smote him with their hands." Now I think their work was pure cruelty. The Jews, again, these are Roman soldiers in an occupied territory. They would not have been well treated by many of the population. There was a mutual hatred there, and now here is the King of the Jews. Well, if he's the King of the Jews, he needs to be done upright. He needs a crown. Oh, here are these terrible thorns. We can just mold them around and stick those on his head. And here's Jesus already probably near shock medically when they would put he needs a scepter. Here's a stick. His anointing oil was the spit that they offered to his face. And in that pitiful condition, wearing the crown of thorns, verse 5, and the purple robe, Pilate brought him out where the people could see him and uttered those famous words, "Behold the man." If he was expecting sympathy, he didn't get it. Verse 6 says, "The chief priests, therefore, the officers, when they saw him, they cried out, saying, 'Crucify him, crucify him.' Pilate said to them, 'You take him and crucify him. I find no fault in him.' But verse 7, the Jews answered, and this tipped the balance. 'We have a law, and by our law he ought to die because he made himself the Son of God.' And when Pilate heard that, he was the more afraid. And Pilate, therefore, went in again into the judgment hall, verse 9, and said to Jesus, 'Where are you from?' And he wouldn't answer him. The Jews had, in their frustration, let the cat out of the bag, as we say. The real reason we want this man dead is because he claims he's not of this world. And when Pilate heard that, he put it all together. It terrified him, and he went back and said, 'Where are you from?' And he wouldn't answer. Pilate, in anger and frustration, said, 'You don't speak to me,' verse 10. 'Do you not know that I have the power to crucify you and the power to release you?' Jesus answered, 'You could have no power at all over me, except it were given thee from above. Therefore he that delivered me unto you has the greater sin.' Thenceforth Pilate sought to release him, but the Jews cried out, 'If thou release this man, thou art not Caesar's friend. Whoever makes himself a king speaks against Caesar.'" We don't have the time or the desire today to go back through the secular history that surrounds this man Pilate. But the story in a summary is this. You know, if you are put in possession, in power as a Roman official over a province, your job there is to, number one, keep the peace. Number two, keep the peace. Number three, do justice. Number four, keep the peace. Collect the taxes, of course, is above all, though. And Pilate had not done well. He's over this difficult province to manage. The Jews are difficult people to manage. And he had already had several run-ins. And his record wasn't great. Also, history tells us that the guy in Rome that was Pilate's friend that got him the job in the first place had fallen out of favor. So here's Pilate, and he's on shaky ground, and his friends in Rome are gone. And he's about one recall away from being shipped out where the dogs don't even bark. And here the Jews bring up this message. They say, if you let this man go, you're not Caesar's friend. And that must have chilled him to the bone. And so, verse 13, when Pilate therefore heard that saying, he brought Jesus forth, and he sat down on the judgment seat in the place called the pavement, which is in the Hebrew Gabbatha. When Pilate saw, this is Matthew's account now. Matthew picks up the story and says, when Pilate saw that he could prevail nothing, but that a tumult was made, he took water and he washed his hands before the multitude, and he said, I'm innocent of the blood of this just person. See you to it. Pilate washed his hands of the matter. I wish that that water could have taken care of his problem, but it didn't. But the people answered, they said, yeah, that's fine with us. His blood be on us and on our children. And they released Barabbas, and they delivered Jesus to be crucified. I think about this man Pilate. And of course there's more to be said about him. We'll pause there with his story. But, you know, Pilate, one day, one early morning, suddenly faced the most important decision he would ever make in his life. What will I do with Jesus? His aim, I think clearly, was to try to release Jesus, but he had to get the Jews' approval to release Jesus. Otherwise, he might be in danger. He used every tactic that he knew. He tried to reason with them. I find no fault in him. He tried to shame them. Well, how about Barabbas? Any better than Barabbas? Even you'd have to admit that. No, they wouldn't. He tried to use pity. Look how pitiful he is. I've beaten him nearly to death. Nothing worked. And in the end, what did he do? He gave the order. What he did was he failed. This is the most important moment of his life, and he failed. Now, let me say this. Pilate's failure was not because he had no choice. I know, and you know, that God used Pilate and the decision he made to work his work, because it was always God's purpose to crucify Christ. But don't you know that that work could have been done if Pilate had done the right thing? Pilate could have stood up and been the hero and done the right thing, and he would have been removed, and somebody else would have gotten that work done that day. I have no doubt that that's true. Pilate did not do what he did because God made him. He wasn't a robot. Gable was talking to us the other night from James 1, reminding us how that no man is tempted of God. God doesn't make us do evil. He doesn't want us to do evil. It was not a lack of evidence. We've seen that just in the few verses we've read together today. How many ways was it made plain that Jesus was not guilty? In fact, he was not of this world. I like what Paul wrote in 1 Timothy 6 and verse 13. Many years later in this letter, he writes, I urge you in the sight of God, Timothy, who gives life to all things, and before Christ Jesus, who witnessed the good confession before Pontius Pilate. What the Lord told him should have been enough to have changed his life. It did not. It was not a lack of insight either. As we read, Pilate knew this was for envy. He understood from the very beginning that Jesus was innocent and he was being mistreated by these men. So why did Pilate fail? He failed because, well, in the first place, he loved himself too much. He loved himself too much. What would it have cost Pilate if he had decided to do the right thing instead of the political thing? Well, I'm sure it likely would have cost him his job. It might have cost him his life. If Pilate that day had become a Christian, you think that might have had some effect on shortening his life? I expect it would have. But I remember what Jesus said in Mark chapter 8, verse 34. And I want us to read this together. Mark 8:34. Jesus called the people and disciples together, and this is what he told them. Whoever comes after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. Whoever will save his life will lose it, and whoever will lose his life for my sake and for the gospel's, the same shall save it. And then he asked this question. He said, what shall a man profit if he gain the whole world and lose his own soul? Or what shall a man give in exchange for his soul? Whoever therefore shall be ashamed of me and of my words in this adulterous and sinful generation, of him shall also the Son of Man be ashamed, when he comes in the glory of his Father with his holy angels. That's a great point. How people trade their soul so cheaply for things that don't matter and that don't last. We love this life so much that we trade away eternity for it. Pilate failed because he loved himself and this life and this world too much, and he loved the truth too little. That's the other side, really, the same coin. He thought, I'll do right if I can do right and not have to pay a big price. I'll do right if other people will not condemn me for it. And it just doesn't work that way. You know, we've been studying in the adult class from the first part of the life of Christ, and you remember in the great passage in Matthew chapter 5 and verse 16, where he talks there about seeking after, loving, hungering after righteousness. Those are the people that will be filled. It can't be an option. It can't be a second best. It has to be first. He that wills to do his will, he shall know of the doctrine. In Luke chapter 9 and in verse 57, you have these people who sort of want to go follow Jesus, and the Lord challenges each of them in a way that's quite memorable. This is Luke chapter 9 and verse 57. It came to pass that as they went along the way, that a certain man said, Lord, I'll follow you wherever you go. Really? Well, foxes have holes, and the birds of the air have nests, and the Son of Man hath not where to lay his head. That seems to put a damper on things. In verse 59, Jesus said to a man, follow me. He said, well, but first let me go and bury my father. Let the dead bury their dead. But go thou and preach the kingdom of God. Another also said, Lord, I'll follow you, but let me first go and bid them farewell which are at my house. And he said, no man, having put his hand to the plow and looking back, is fit for the kingdom of God. Now, the Lord's a demanding Lord. The Pilate had his chance. He had his opportunity. The door was open. But when you say no, when you say not now, when you say maybe one day, those opportunities pass us by. So here's a couple of lessons that we'll mention as we close from, I think, the example of Pilate. You could certainly add to these. But one lesson, I think, is this. We call Pilate the man in the middle. The truth is, as you know, there is no middle when it comes to God. There's no middle ground. There's we're with him or we're against him. If we're not gathering, we're scattering. We're his servants or we're really his opposition. That's a very blunt way to put it, isn't it? That's true about everybody in this room right now. If we're mature enough to make a decision like this, we are for him or against him. We're on his side or not. And it's important to ask the question, which side am I on? In the second place, I think it's important to give the right final answer. How many times did he say, not guilty? But his final answer was, take him and crucify. You know, it's important for us to say the right thing, to give the right answer and stay with it and let that be our last answer. Because the devil certainly, as a roaring lion, walks about seeking whom he may devour. In the third place, I would say that the decision that we make today may be the most important decision of our life, and it may be the decision that we stick with because it may be the last opportunity we have. Pilate's legacy, I think, was sealed on this day in a situation that was brought to his door when he failed to do what he knew was right. I think every one of us, in a sense, does that today. We leave this building united with God or not. And for all we know, it may be the last opportunity we have to make that decision. I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just saying Pilate gives me that lesson. That's the truth about all of us. Back in John 19, we read this earlier. When Jesus said to Pilate these words, he said that you could have no power over me at all except it be given you from above. And therefore the one who delivered me unto you has the greater sin. I think he was talking there about the Jews. Pilate certainly should have responded to Christ. But the Jews who had grown up with the law and were experts in the law, they had much less excuse for saying no to Jesus. I think that's true about me. There are a lot of folks in this world that haven't been exposed to Jesus like I have. If I let him down, I think I might fit in that category of those who have the greater sin. Maybe that's true about you as well. That's why it's urgent for us to answer the call when we have it. What about us? What about today? Please get out your songbooks and turn to the number that's been selected. If it be your desire this morning to become a child of God, to be a servant of God, to come back to God, whatever the need might be, make that decision today. Thank God for the opportunity today. Don't dare tell him no. Don't dare let the moment pass. If we can help you, let us know how. While we stand and sing, you come.